Welcome back to the stuff your accountant isn't telling you. Now, I've been on a tour this year of traveling all across the country, speaking at different conferences. And so, what I'm going to do is a special series of recapping some of the major points of the conversations that I've been having with accountants, with business owners. And today, we're going to recap my speech at Venture Ashborough, where I talked to a group of entrepreneurs and I really gave them the rundown on things that their accountant isn't telling them. So stay tuned for today's episode.
Welcome to the podcast where we tell small business owners how to use the secrets and strategies that big businesses use to increase their profitability.
So, as I said, we're doing a series where we're going to recap some of the key conversations that I've had over the last year at different conferences. And I'm telling you, it has been amazing traveling the country. And this is some really good stuff because we got a lot of great feedback from different business owners, different entrepreneurs, all of the amazing companies that brought us in to speak. And just to give you a little bit of a glimpse of it. So, here's a picture of what our year has been like this far. Now, if you're listening to this and you're not watching it on YouTube or you're not watching it on some other platform or watching it on our website, what I have on the screen here is what our itinerary looked like for the year. Now, we started off the year with doing a speaking engagement with Venture Ashborough, where we partnered with them, and I spoke at their as part of their Accelerating Equity in Business. Amazing program. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But also on the rest of the screen, what you see is, and we went pretty quiet for a while, really working on really growing the business. There's some other things that we were working on behind the scenes, which I'll tell you a little bit more about. But June and then August, things really took off. There were 6 speaking engagements in the month of August alone. So there are a lot that I'm going to recap. But as I said, today I'm really going to talk about the Venture Ashborough conference. Now, so at the Venture Ashborough engagement, I talked about finance, business structures, and taxes. Why? Because there's a lot in that area that a lot of business owners are kind of struggling with, and where they're struggling to figure out. Now, on the finance side, definitely we covered a lot of great things there. On the business structure side, there's a lot of questions there. Now, I will say there's an accounting and a legal aspect to it, but I'll give you a highlight of what I talked about there. And then we also pulled some of the things we did from a series. It was actually a course that we created called the Stay Out of Jail Plan, where we cover some of the key topics or some of the key areas where people are getting into trouble when it comes down to the tax and the accounting side of their firm. So I'll give you a highlight of some of the things and some of the key points I talked about there. Now, I'm not going to redo the entire speech, but what I will do is I'll point out some of the highlights, but I'm telling you, there was so much more in the entire speech. Now, I do have to give a special shout out to the Venture Ashborough team and their leader, this gentleman by the name of Dr. Jonathan Thiel. So Dr. Jonathan Thiel, he and I met actually through the NC Idea, which is a organization that is solely targeted on really revitalizing the entrepreneurial community throughout North Carolina. They are focused on doing things like grants. They are focused on hosting incubators, connecting startups with potential investors or connecting startups with mentors to help them kind of navigate that journey. And they've been doing some great things because they've been able to really bring millions and millions of dollars to different businesses. And so the team over at NC Idea, through them, I was able to connect with the gentleman named Dr. Jonathan Thiel. Dr. Jonathan Thiel, what I liked about him and his story was that he is focused on really revitalizing the entrepreneurial spirit within rural communities. A lot of times when you're thinking about entrepreneurs, people aren't really thinking about entrepreneurship in the rural communities. They're really looking at the major cities. But when you think about it, here in America, in the United States of America, there are about 64 plus million people who live in rural communities. Now, when just to give you a little bit of context on that, 64 million people is a lot of people because right now there are about 195 countries in the world. Only 20 of the 195 countries in the world have more than 64 million people. So what I really loved about, Dr. Jonathan Thiel's initiative is he's focused on bringing an impact to a enormous population that a lot of people tend to be overlooking. But there is so much entrepreneurial energy in the rural communities. Now, he's starting his mission here in North Carolina, and they're doing some great things, and which is why I was excited to be brought in to speak to the entrepreneurial group that they had for that session. So hats off to Dr. Jonathan Thiel for the work that they're doing over at Venture Ashborough. And, just to give you an idea. So if you're watching this on YouTube or you're watching this on our website, one of the great things you'll be able to see is this image. And this is one of those images that I found that was on their website that I really, really like. Actually, it was on their Facebook page for Venture Ashborough. And it really exemplifies the way that he thinks about, approaching the impact that they're trying to make. Whereas, before you used to have people who just wanted to be managers, they wanted to tell other people what to do. But when you really transition and you say, okay, how can we be leaders in the community? It's how can we get in there and do things with them to where he's not just trying to advise people on how they can start and run a business. He's actually starting and running businesses himself in rural communities. So he's living and breathing the same thing that he's trying to help entrepreneurs in the rural community with. And that is why I really loved working with them. Now, for my talk that I did with them, a couple of things that we covered. I think the first one that we covered was, why does finance matter? Because when you're talking to a lot of entrepreneurs and you're talking to business owners, a lot of times you're probably going to be talking to someone who doesn't have an accounting or finance background. And when you're talking to someone who doesn't have an accounting and finance background, you really do have to explain why it matters. So here's how I often explain why finance matters. It matters on three different areas. It matters in the area of decision making, it matters in the area of navigation, and tax slash regulations. Now, the decision making piece is really about how you think through what do we do next or what direction should we go in. Now, if you don't have a clear picture on the finance side of your business, you're probably going to struggle to figure that out. So what I would tell people a lot of times is, your finances will kind of help you draw out that picture. Here's a clear example. I talk to a lot of business owners who say, "Oh, well, we want to be a $1 million business." And I'll say, "Okay, all right. Why do you want to be $1 million business?" It was like, "Well, that's the goal we think we should achieve." So I'm like, "Okay, let's break it down. Let's look at some numbers." So let's look at, all right, what's your average price per client? And they'll tell me what their average price per client is. So let's say if their average price per client is something like $10,000 per client. And then I say, okay, all right, you told me it's $10,000 per client. The next question that we want to ask ourselves is, all right, if you want to do $1 million, then what I really need to understand next is how many clients do you need to do $1 million? So let's just do the math. I'm going to pull up a calculator. So a million divided by $10,000. What that tells me is you need 100 customers in order for you to hit $1 million in revenue. Now, I always say when we take that step back and we say, okay, all right, how many customers do you have today? And a lot of times when I'm talking to people, they're like, well, we have like 15 customers or we have 20 customers. And I say, okay, all right, what do you need to do to go from 20 to 100? And they're like, we don't really think we can get there within the next year. Then I'm like, well, if it's not realistic for you to be, or even, remotely possible for you to go from 20 customers to 100 in 1 year in a sustainable way, like why make $1 million your goal this year? Why not come up with a goal that actually makes sense? And the only way you can get there sometimes is by actually looking at the numbers. So that's one of the reasons why I tell people finance matters. Now, the other aspect is navigation. Now, when it comes down to navigation, I tell people, think about this kind of like you're driving in a car, you're going on a road trip. Now, if you're going on a road trip, you can go the old school route of you can grab a map, or you can maybe print off the directions, hop in the car, head on your way, or you can use something called like a GPS. Now, what the GPS is doing is it's constantly mapping your route from where you are to where you want to be. And it's giving you indications and saying, hey, you should probably make a left turn, or not saying probably, it's telling you, make a left turn and 55 or 400 feet, or take exit 15 in 3 miles. Is constantly giving you that feedback that you need so that you know you're headed on the right path. When you think about your finances that way, it really does give you consistent and steady feedback to help you really identify, like, hey, what decisions do we need to make right now to make sure we're still headed in the right direction? And that's the navigation that your finances can really help you with in your business. Because let's be honest, when you're running a business, there are going to be a lot of decisions that you need to make. And what you want to make sure is that when you're making those decisions, you want to make it in a way that's going to help you get closer to where you want to go. You don't want to just be kind of shooting in the dark or just guessing, because that's going to get pretty overwhelming. Now, the last part, this one probably seems a little bit more obvious, but it comes down to tax and regulation. Now, when it comes down to tax and regulation, there are different strategies that come into play. But let's be honest. On the tax side, you cannot file a reliable tax return without actually having the accounting or the financial numbers. So you need to make sure you have financial statements that are going to support your tax return. Now, I've seen a lot of issues where people just tried to use their bank account, and I'm telling you, that is not the same thing as having your financial statements. If you just look at, well, how much money do we have in the bank? We're going to use that. And so, like, you could probably get yourself into a lot of trouble there. And then on the regulation side, a lot of people really felt the pain of this during 2020, 2021, when the pandemic hit, and there were these opportunities for people to apply for loans or to apply for grants. Well, one of the things that the grant was asking for is it was asking for financial statements. A lot of the people who didn't have financial statements, they weren't able to actually take advantage of some of these grant opportunities, some of the loan opportunities, because they didn't have the financial reporting or the financial structure in place to be able to capitalize on that opportunity. So those are the three areas that I kind of introduced them to. And then we went into detail in a lot more of those. The next thing we talked about was the business structure. Now, this becomes an interesting one for a lot of business owners, which you're trying to figure out, should I be an LLC, an S Corp, a C Corp, a partnership, a limited partnership? There's all these different options. The way I kind of explain that without going into the full detail is, think of it like a vehicle. Let's say if you are, again, you're taking a trip somewhere. Now, what I will tell you is, if you were to ask me, hey, what type of vehicle should I use to go on this trip? My answer is going to be, it depends. Where are you going and where are you today? See, the vehicle that you use should be pretty compatible with the reality of your situation. And I always tell people that when you're picking the type of business entity that you want to choose, you really do want to pick one that is compatible to where you are today, where you want to go, what's that journey need to look like. For example, if you were in the US and you told me that you were trying to get to Europe, well, you're going to either have to take a boat, a plane, because there is no other option to help you get over the ocean at the moment. Now, maybe in the future, there will be some type of, underground tunnel, or there'll be some type of train that can take you from the US, or I guess from North America over to Europe. it doesn't exist right now. So you have to operate in the reality of it. Now, also, the thing to keep in mind is as you're taking a trip, one of the things that you'll realize is that you may not use the same mode of transportation the entire time. You may start off in a plane. When you land, you may then have to get into a vehicle or take a train or take a bus to finish the other part of your trip. Now, for a lot of people that are thinking about what type of business structure should I use, the structure you need today may not necessarily be the same structure that you need tomorrow or you need down the road. So you do want to keep things like that in mind. And so as we kind of talk through this session, one of the things that I did is I broke it down to them like, hey, here are some of the common business structures. These are, a sole proprietorship, a limited partnership, and a LLP, LLC, S Corp, and C Corp. And without going into rehashing all the details, here's what I kind of walked them through. I gave them a framework and said, hey, here's a framework of key questions you should ask yourself when it comes down to which one should you choose. So, for example, if you have no money whatsoever and you have, let's say, a simple product you're trying to get started as fast as possible to generate some cash, then one of the important questions for you is, okay, how do you get this set up? See, setting up a C Corp may cost you a lot more money if you're trying to do that from the ground up and you have no money. That may not be the best option for you. Maybe you need to choose a business structure that actually is compatible to your situation. And then as you build and grow, then maybe you can transition into a C corporation. See, there's so many different aspects to keep in mind. Like, how does it get started? What are the compliance or the tax requirements? From a legal standpoint, what levels of protection does this type of entity give you? And do you necessarily need it for the type of business that you have? And then also, kind of, what's the use case? Is this a situation where, hey, I'm really not going to be seriously building this business. This is just a hobby that sometimes I make money off of. Like, I sell something online every now and then. Like, that may impact what type of entity you pick. So we covered all of that and we went through this framework for every single one of the business entities, and they got a lot of value out of it. Now, the other thing that I covered with them, and this one was really, really impactful, is how taxes work. Now, this was a really good, engaging conversation, and they had a lot of questions about it. And we actually went through some tax examples where I literally took a scenario and we walked through calculating that person's tax liability from start to finish so they can see how the process works. But for the purposes of this podcast, the point that I wanted to draw back to, and this is what I think is very relevant, is how tax law gets created. So I explained to them is when it comes down to the creation of tax law here in the US, here's the process here's how the process is designed, how tax law gets made. Because people ask the question oftentimes, why is tax law so complicated? Well, I mean, you have a committee within the federal politicians. There's some committees called the Ways and the Means Committee. They make a suggestion to the House of Representatives. It gets approved there. It goes to the Senate. The Senate approves it. Then it goes to sometimes a joint committee between the House and the Senate. That gets approved. And once it gets the full congressional approval, then it moves to the office of the president. The president signs it and it becomes law. This is the way that the process is designed. And if it flowed this way, I would tell you tax law would be a lot less complicated. But the reality of it is tax law really operates kind of like this. There are all these extra parties that are involved that are weighing in, putting in their opinions, and things don't tend to go in a straight line. There's all of this back and forth, and there's this give and take. That's why whenever you ask someone or an accountant or a enrolled agent a question about, well, hey, what can I do this on my taxes? A lot of times the answer you're going to get is, well, it depends. Because in the process of all of this chaos of how the tax laws got made, there are all these exceptions that come in. There's these different questions. That is why I think it is very important for you to work with someone who actually understands the tax law that is applicable to your type of business. Now, I'm probably going to be doing a video later on because I've seen a lot of situations where someone on LinkedIn or someone on, well, more so less LinkedIn, more TikTok, Instagram, where they're giving tax advice. And I'm like, that is actually bad advice. Don't follow that. Now, there are some people out there that I think that are giving some good tax advice, and you should definitely check those people out. Now, we've had some of those people on the show, like my friend Laura Lynn Wilson, also the tax guy. We've had him on, and there are many other people that are actually putting out good information and giving you really good context. And I think that you really do need someone who understands the complexity of your tax situation. And that's who you should be working with to get advice, because I'm telling you, tax law is complicated and it's probably not looking like it's going to get any simpler. So you do want to keep that in mind. Now, I also cover, because this is the reason why it came up so much, is because there are some pretty common mistakes that people are making when it comes down to tax law. And so when it comes down to filing your taxes, when it comes down to how you're treating your taxes, here are some common areas where people are making mistakes. Now, we have an entire course called the Stay Out of Jail Plan, where we go into this in full detail. But the thing I wanted to really point out for this podcast is really about the difference between tax avoidance and tax evasion, because a lot of people get these mixed up. Because the thing is, tax avoidance is using the law and cooperating with the law to legally lower your tax liability. Tax evasion is where you're doing something illegal. Like, you're very likely going to end up in jail if you continue to keep doing tax evasion, because it is illegal ways of trying to lower your taxes. Now, what you need to understand when it comes down to taxes and tax liability, like, most people do not like paying taxes. I mean, most people, when they realize how much they're paying in taxes, most people look at that and they are a bit concerned, and they look at that and they say, man, like, that much money is coming out. Like, my gosh, like, I didn't realize I was paying this much in taxes. And I would say is that, you know what? I don't think there's a situation where you could ever live and not pay any taxes at all. But there are some legal ways and some legal strategies that you can implement that can help you when it comes down to really taking advantage of some tax avoidance strategies. Now, I'm not going to go into full detail on it because this is just a recap of some of the stuff we covered. But I'll give you this kind of general perspective. And this is what I told the audience, and this was something that really helped them, is when you think about tax avoidance, is think about it this way. If we go back and realize that, these tax laws are being created by politicians who were voted in, who serve in office, and at a very, very high level. Like I said, I know there's a lot of political, back and forth that plays into this. But if you really take let's say a 10,000-foot level, the idea of the tax code is that, the politicians want to help spur the economy and keep the economy healthy, keep the economy growing. Again, ignoring for the sake of this conversation, we're not going to dive into the political agendas of different audiences or different politicians, but just at a high level, no one wants to be responsible for tanking the economy. And so in general, part of what they're trying to do with the tax code is they're trying to encourage certain behavior that will keep the economy healthy, which is why when you look at the tax code, a lot of times different things in the tax code or different strategies for tax avoidance are kind of tied to situations where you are helping the economy stay healthy. Here's one very simple example. 401k plans. When you invest in a 401k plan, a lot of times there are some benefits of deferring your taxes. So it becomes a benefit for some people when you're putting money into a 401k. Well, when you think about it, The money that you're putting into a 401k is then being used and reinvested back into businesses today to help keeping the economy running or to add liquidity into the market so that it can fund businesses so those businesses can keep growing and staying healthy. And if you think about it from that perspective, investing in a 401k has a indirect way of helping the economy stay healthy and continue growing. Similar thing of whenever you start a business, when you're making investments into your business, whether you're hiring people or whether you're buying machinery and equipment, like you're paying money to either hire people, which means you're employing people, which means now those people have income, they're paying taxes. Actually, they can become profitable contributors to the economy as well. Well, as a business, there are some tax deductions that come with being able to hire people and being able to pay those people. So if you think about it from that perspective and ask yourself, hey, the things that I'm trying to do when it comes down to tax avoidance versus tax evasion, does this have a indirect or a direct way of me participating in the greater economy? For the most part, I would say, now there may be some exceptions, but in general, if you are the only one that is benefiting, like if whatever you're doing, there is no direct or indirect benefit to the greater economy, what I would probably say is that may sound a little more like a tax evasion strategy as opposed to a tax avoidance strategy. Now, of course, because I showed you that map of how complicated tax code is written, there are some exceptions to that general rule that I just said, or there may be some exceptions to that general rule, but that's a good idea to kind of point you in the right direction. Now, as I said, this topic can go very, very deep, which is why we do a whole entire section on the stay out of jail plan. And I'm not going to recap the entire thing here, but I did want to give you a little bit of a flavor and really let you know the audience really enjoyed the session. The audience thought that this was really, really good. They were like, hey, you know what? We're so glad you shared this information. We're so glad you shared this insight because this really helped us answer some critical questions. Now, for all of you that love us and you've been really tuning into the show, I would definitely tell you thank you so much, but also tell your friends about the two shows that we really run primarily is the law firms and finance. Like if you know a law firm owner or a law firm administrator, definitely tell them to visit the website and tell them to really sign up and subscribe to become a listener, regular listener of that show. We're always sharing great insight. Plus, we're doing some amazing things because this year I'll be the chair of the law firm finance committee. Also, on the stuff your accountant isn't telling you, we took a little bit of a break because we've been on the tour for the year, but we're coming back with even more great content to really help you. And I just want to say thank you so much for being patient while we've been on the road, but we're back and we're going to be sharing more great content with you. So thanks for tuning in.